Well, welcome back. Thanks for being with us again as we continue this journey through Mark's Gospel, and hope you've been reading along. So we're up to roughly the 21st chapter, 21st verse of chapter 1. And as we said yesterday, the question of who is this guy?
So throughout the Gospel of Mark, that is a consistent theme. People are asking, who is this man? The demons know. When Jesus casts out an unclean spirit, the demons cry out and say, "We know who you are."
So they went to Capernaum. Let's start there. And where they encountered this unclean spirit. Tell us a little bit about Capernaum and why that matters in the context of the gospel.
Yeah, so Jesus seems to have navigated over from, after John's arrest, from Nazareth, a short distance, but Capernaum being right next to the Sea of Galilee. That's where literally the town rests on the banks of the shore of the Sea of Galilee.
And it's the northern end of the Sea of Galilee.
Northern end of the Sea of Galilee.
Beautiful place.
Beautiful spot, probably great fishing. And that's where he encounters James and John, Peter, James, John, Andrew.
And it's where he will work out of.
It becomes home base. Yeah.
So he is one of the customs that Jesus always followed was to go to synagogue, which would be a gathering. A synagogue roughly means the gathering of the people.
So having the two of us have been to this spot, there is literally a synagogue, literally a stone's throw from the banks of the Sea of Galilee. The one that was excavated probably almost, it wasn't quite to Jesus' time, but certainly would have been along the same format. Quite fascinating to see the closeness of this place, and this story about Simon's mother-in-law being healed. Literally, we could see right where that would have been.
So he comes into the synagogue, he teaches, and there's something different about this guy.
Yeah, Jesus teaches not as a scribe. The scribes would have gone back and said, based on case law, what rabbi said, what rabbi said, what rabbi said. Jesus doesn't refer to other rabbis. He simply speaks with the authority of the voice of God.
And there must have been something compelling about the physical presence of Jesus.
Absolutely.
I think that's something we don't talk about very often, but there was something about him. Otherwise, James and John wouldn't have come and followed him. There was something about him. Otherwise, people wouldn't have been amazed in the synagogue. But in that synagogue, again, who recognizes him? There's a man with an unclean spirit. And how do you understand what the unclean spirit is?
You know, a lot of people would argue and say this is someone who has a mental disease, maybe someone who has some sort of disease of what do you call it? Has fits or something like that. We really don't know the name of it, but we do know that there is always a connection between the emotional, mental, and physical health. And whatever the case, Jesus is Lord of all of it.
Well, and I think what matters most is what Mark is trying to tell us with this, that there's something beyond the power of, or the reality of this world that proclaims who Jesus is. Even if it is the demonic power. Mark's trying to tell us this is truly, again, everything that he's told us so far is Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God. This is another indication that Mark wants us to know Jesus is the Son of God. And the people in the story itself are muddled and confused, but we're not supposed to be muddled.
So it really gets Jesus into trouble with the religious authorities in chapter 2 with this paralytic. Paralytic's brought to Jesus. Jesus, instead of saying, hey, your physical disease or your emotional disease, whatever's healed, he says your sins are forgiven. And this really upsets the apple cart. This really upsets them. Who do you think you are to be able to proclaim forgiveness of sins? And Jesus says, which is easier? Which I think he's throwing them a bone and just going along with them. Easier to say forgive sins or get up and walk. It is a fascinating thing that Jesus ties these two together.
Right. And he, of course, in chapter 2, he says, which is easier, and then he commands the paralytic to get up and walk. And that, so in short order, and of course there are a couple other stories read through for chapter 1, but in short order, we're barely into chapter 2, and Jesus is already on the radar of the authorities, and not in a good way.
So then Jesus does something even more controversial, something that certainly would have stirred the pot even more. He goes out and he calls to be one of his closest followers. He calls a tax collector by the name of Levi, who we might know as Matthew, and says, "You come be one of my inner circle."
Yeah.
Now,
And if you've watched The Chosen, which is a really well done series, go back and watch the part where Matthew was first introduced, and you'll get a sense of just how reviled the tax collectors would have been. And that's understandable, because the tax collectors were Jews who had, they collaborated with the Romans. They were part of the problem, and again,
really turned on their own people and stole from their own people,
right,
out of their own selfish greed.
So, and why, so not only would that be a problem, I think about many of you have been in situations in your professional life where you've tried to build cohesive teams. I know part of the goal of churches at like Huntersville and Denver is to have a good functioning team, staff. And when teams function well, they're unstoppable. But when teams don't function well, they're really difficult. And maybe you know what it's like to have been on a team, a business, a group where you had dissent and you had personality conflicts. So it really matters who you select to be on that team. Jesus has selected Matthew to be on his team. And I'll just go ahead and call him Matthew, because I think that helps clear it up for me a little bit.
Levi and Matthew
or they're interchangeable.
Right.
And so remember who Jesus called earlier, James and John. Do you remember their nicknames, James and John?
Sons of Zebedee.
And also known as the sons of Thunder.
Yeah.
That's
couple
not
hotheads.
Yeah, a couple of hotheads. It's most likely almost. It's virtually indisputable that they were zealots, which means they were the people who wanted to go to war with Rome.
And for Jesus to introduce Matthew, Levi into the conversation probably wouldn't have gone over too well.
No.
The old team meeting wouldn't have gone well.
No, it's like, hey guys, I got a new recruit here. His name's Matthew. He's a tax collector, and it probably would have gotten really quiet.
Yeah, James and John would have been like,
let me cut his throat.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that's the kind of anger and hatred that would have been towards him. So what is it about So
Jesus then immediately after this, then he goes in and he does something to further agitate the religious authorities, and he heals on the Sabbath. Now, again, it is really difficult for us to understand in our current culture just how offensive this would have been for the religious authorities. I think you have to go back a little bit to my growing up. Few things you didn't do on Sunday growing up, and mowing grass. I just remember driving by somebody's house. If they were mowing grass, our family looked at them like they were the biggest sinners. Couldn't believe somebody did no better than to mow their grass on Sunday.
How disrespectful could you be?
How disrespectful.
Could you imagine coming into the 11 o'clock worship service at either Huntersville or at Denver and wearing your old ratty tank top?
Yeah.
Probably not. It's just that kind of, but it's more than that. It's beyond that. We can't even come up with an illustration of how jarring it would be for Jesus to engage in this.
And so the conversation with the religious authorities, the Pharisees and otherwise, is that why are you intentionally sticking your finger in the eye of this? This is sacred to us. Yeah. And why are you doing this? And Jesus clarifies and says the Sabbath was not, man was not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for humankind. I think the real meaning of what Jesus is trying to get at is Jesus knows, God knows in creation, we need rest for our bodies, minds, and spirits. And it was not a punishment to give us the Sabbath. It was a gift. It was a gift to say, this is what I'm telling you. You can rest and you should renew.
And here's someone who desperately needs help.
Yeah.
And just because it happens to be Saturday or the Sabbath I'm not going to heal them.
Yeah.
And so this gets back to, again, all of this ties back to that initial proclamation that Jesus offers: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. I'm going to show you what that kingdom is, and you're going to have to think differently. You're going to have to think in terms of, oh, wait, I need to welcome others into the fellowship that I wouldn't normally welcome. I'm going to have to think about ministry differently.
In another quick little aside, which is important for us as we get ready to move to chapter 3, is Jesus is referring to himself at this time as the Son of Man. Now, if I say little s, little m, Son of Man, I'm just calling myself a human being. But Jesus seems to really be helping people understand, capital S, capital M, Jesus is the Son of Man, which for us is a reminder that Jesus is going to hold together his divinity and his humanity, and both of those have to be present in the fullest extent for Jesus really to be who we need him to be the God who comes and dies for us, but also the human who we can relate to and understand. So we're going to get a little deeper into that tomorrow as we get into chapter 3. We are grateful as always for your time today. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, bye.